So do you enjoy the content here on Thoughtful Faith? If so, be sure to hit the notification bell. This ensures that our new videos show up on your feed. Also, be sure to check out our Facebook group called Thoughtful Saints, where myself and others discuss the sorts of topics found on this channel. And lastly, if you think other people would benefit from this video, please be sure to share it. So I wanted to make a quick preface to this video. In this video, I'm speaking with Jacob IsBell, who is a prominent figure in the Doctrine of Christ community. This is a group who claims that the current church is in apostasy, and that Joseph Smith was not a polygamist, and therefore did not author the section on polygamy in the Doctrine and Covenants, section 132. This group believes that section 132 of the Doctrine and Covenants was not produced by Joseph Smith in 1843, but was the later creation of Brigham Young and other conspirators. In this episode, we explore the specific contemporaneous journal entries and records about the emergence of section 132, and what people on both inside and outside of the church said about when the revelation was first given. Also, a huge shout out to the research of Brian Hales and Jacob Vidrine. It was largely information from their research that assisted me in this exploration. Also, please forgive any misspellings or mispronunciations in this video. It had been kind of a long day for me. Also, if there are any factual errors, please let me know in the comments, and I will include corrections in the show notes. So, was section 132 authored by Joseph in 1843? Or was it the later creation of Brigham Young and his cabal of sexual deviants, as this Doctrine of Christ group claims? Okay, so let's dig into section 132, because from a Latter-day Saint perspective, we sit back and go, well, hold up here, dude. If section 132 was authored by Joseph Smith, it's pretty clear that Joseph Smith then was practicing polygamy and was teaching polygamy, and section 132 is that. And so therefore, the onus is to say, well, there must be some other explanation from your guys' perspective. So a Latter-day Saint says, but what about section 132? And your response is, what follows?
So here's the question that I got asked. This is December of 2019. I got a buddy who's about a decade older than me who says, why do you think Joseph Smith was a polygamist? And I tell him, dude, it's a done deal. He says, what do you mean it's a done deal? I'm like, it's well established, Joseph Smith's polygamy. He asked, by who? And I said, the wives. He says, when they write it down. Well, I know it was years after Joseph's death. He asked, what's the revelation that commands the Latter-day Saints to practice polygamy? I tell him, Doctrine and Covenants, section 132. He's hitting me. When did the Latter-day Saints see it? July 12th, 1843. Will, I can teach a class on it right now. I've read every single sermon taught on the subject of polygamy by every Latter-day Saint leader, and I can teach it right now impromptu. And he says, when did the Latter-day Saints first see section 132? If you'll share,
I can tell you that you had an error.
I know.
It was 1852.
Yes. Yeah. It was not until September 14th, 1852 that it was read to the Latter-day Saints, and it was published in the Desert.
That it was published publicly.
Yeah, it was published publicly. So there's some evidences in the Nauvoo Expositor that something may have been read inside of a council meeting. But if you share my screen right now, just a couple of things regarding section 132. This is the one and only document which exists in the world which claims to be Joseph Smith teaching the doctrine of polygamy. In other words, there's no second or third witness of the Lord commanding this of anybody. The Latter-day Saints didn't see it, at least not publicly, until 1852.
Okay.
There's no original of Doctrine and Covenants section 132 in existence. And now, 8 years after Joseph Smith's assassination, the story is that, well, Hyrum goes to his brother Joseph. Joseph, Emma's still so mad about you and these extra wives. If only you could give her a revelation on the subject. Section 132 is said to have been received and written down at the time. And then Hyrum takes it to, Joseph takes the original to Emma. She becomes so incensed that she ends up ripping it to shreds. One account says that she ripped it to shreds and threw it in the fire. So what alleges to be a copy of Doctrine and Covenants, section 132, is now presented to the Latter-day Saints 8 years after the death of Joseph Smith. It directly contradicts that everything that Joseph Smith taught publicly and privately that we can obtain on the subject of polygamy. It has numerous obvious doctrinal and historical errors, and it sounds absolutely nothing like any publication Joseph Smith has ever produced in his life.
Okay. And so real quick, just to get a little bit more specific on some of this, are you claiming that are you claiming that there was no revelation given on July 12th, 1843?
I don't know what was presented. I don't know. There's no way that I know of to be able to find out what it is. I know William Law, who was very antagonistic towards the idea of polygamy and attributed it to Joseph Smith. He made comments about a revelation that was shared July at the council meeting. And his thoughts on when he later saw what is now Doctrine and Covenants, section 132, his recollection was, I thought the revelation was much shorter than what I'm seeing here. So yeah. I don't know. My spiritual journey brought me to the following conclusion that I presented to my Heavenly Father, which is Doctrine and Covenants, section 132, as it stands, is fraudulently attributed to Joseph Smith.
So one of the things, and I'm going to add, so I also have been kind of researching this as well, and I'm curious kind of to see my understanding as I've looked at this against some of the things that you're saying. My understanding is that Joseph Smith's own journal, if I'm not mistaken, let me pull this up, that he had a journal entry on Wednesday, July 12th, 1843, where he wrote down that he had received a revelation in the presence of Hyrum and William Clayton. And so again, I'm not now maybe it wasn't, Doctrine and Covenants 132. But I was wondering, and then William Clayton in his journal, these are contemporaneous journals from that time. William Clayton says, that he wrote a revelation consisting of 10 pages on the order of the priesthood, showing the designs in Moses, Abraham, David, and Solomon, having many wives and concubines. So William Clayton is saying that Joseph Smith had a revelation that was, on July 12th on the subject of this. And from my understanding, that's where church historians kind of came up with, this is when section 132 was revealed. Is that, I guess my thing is do you think that there was any revelation that happened? Are there problems with these sources? What are your thoughts on those?
Well, there's definitely problems with the sources. When somebody who, for example, Joseph Smith, publicly and privately condemning polygamy in all of its forms, trying to make sure there's no wiggle room on it. And years after his death, when people are now attributing the practice to him, there is very serious reason to be suspicious of journal entries attributed to Joseph Smith. If you'll share my screen for just a moment,
sure.
Here's one example of it. The only draft of Joseph Smith's journal that may have been observed by him and could be verified for it accurately reflecting is the original version that you see here on August 5th, 1843, regarding Joseph walked up and down the street with scribe and gave instructions to try those who were preaching, teaching, or practicing the doctrine of plurality of wives. On this law, Joseph forbids it and the practice thereof. No man shall have but one wife. Now, if you go to josephsmithpapers.org, you can actually see the handwriting to where certain words that were originally put in are now crossed out. And a different set of handwriting is now sharing the following. Walked up and down the street with scribe and gave instructions to those persons who were preaching, teaching, or practicing the plurality of wives. Crossed out, Joseph forbids it. For according to the law, I hold the keys of this power in the last days, and there is never but one on earth at a time on whom the power and its keys are conferred. And I have constantly said that no man shall have but one wife at a time unless the Lord directs otherwise.
I see.
So it's highly suspicious that this is his journal. Now, I do want to show how this is consistent with Doctrine and Covenants, section 132. For example, if we just go down to verse 7, this is the very, very legalese type language, which you'll never find in any publication from Joseph Smith. But now the same language of, there is never but one on the earth at a time on whom this power and the keys of this priesthood are conferred. So the language that's now in a different set of handwriting attributed to Joseph Smith in his journal is now the same language we find in Doctrine and Covenants 132, and cannot verify any of this publicly until 8 years after Joseph's assassination.
So I guess and my question is, just for clarification, is but related to the specific entry that was made by Joseph Smith and William Clayton in 1832 on August or July 12th. These two so are you saying that you think that there's good reason to believe that this entry from Joseph Smith was not actually by him?
Yeah, highly suspicious of the record keeping of Brigham Young. Share my screen for just a moment. For example, Brigham Young said the following: I commenced in revising the history of Joseph Smith at Brother Richard's office. Elder Heber C. Kimball and George A. Smith were with me. President Joseph Smith had corrected 42 pages before his massacre. Why is Joseph correcting 42 pages, according to it? It afforded us great satisfaction to hear Brother Willard Richards read the history of the infancy of the church, adjourned at 11 p.m., having read 140 pages. Now, I'll simply point out, this is from hemlockknots.com. As you look up topics, polygamy, you can find the different examples of quite openly documented Brigham Young talking about editing the history of the church. Here's a term for people to start researching: the new order of things, meaning the new doctrine of polygamy.
Okay, let's move on, because so there was that initial 1843 claims to revelation that, because one of the things I did is, as I was looking into this, is I wanted to look into the I want to get an idea of the contemporaneous stuff that was written, right? Because if I'm going to look into this, and if there's sort of the cabal, as it were, who went and revised the history, they would have had to go back to some of those original journals, and or what things were happening contemporaneously that they couldn't change, right? So one aspect of it too was there was, in August of 1843, so the next month after the July 12th, there was a meeting of the High Council in Nauvoo, and one of the things that when that group met, all it said in the meeting notes was that no business before the council, teaching by Presidents Hyrum Smith and William Marks. But then Franklin D. Richards, in his contemporaneous journal, said that that Hyrum was essentially speaking about his brother's wife raising up seed unto him. That's the Deuteronomic law in Deuteronomy 25:5-10 that talks about basically polygamy in the Old Testament, where if a brother's wife, or if my brother's wife were to die, or if my brother were to die and he didn't have any children, that I would take his wife as one of my wives, and then I would basically have a child with her. And that was being discussed, at least in the council meeting. So there was some contemporaneous mention that in this council meeting, there was a discussion about potentially polygamy. And so the other thing that came up with that, the big question is what was the doctrine being taught at this meeting? Was Doctrine and Covenants 132 read at the meeting? And there were various people that were in that meeting, right? This is something that I looked up, that Brian Hales had done some research on. And basically all of them that we have record of who were in that meeting had said that that in that meeting was when section 132 was revealed. Are these people essentially just all part of the cabal? That they all were lying? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you bring up Brian C. Hales. I really appreciate the amount of work that he's done on this, but he makes quite obvious a bias that has to be taken into account anytime we listen to his commentary on things. It's great to be pointing out original sources. In his interview with Michelle Brady Stone, he points out to Michelle Brady Stone, you can believe, members of the church can believe anything that they want in their own homes. But if they publicly say things that are against what's taught by the Quorum of the 12 and the First Presidency, hints that that would be grounds for somebody to not be allowed to be a member of the church. He makes quite clear his standard for truth is not what the scriptures teach. It is not an honest evaluation of the original source materials. He makes quite public he will not allow himself to consider a different conclusion than what's taught by the institutional leadership. That is not an honest pursuit of truth. So
and whatever his, and I'm open to
seriously.
I mean, I'm open to whatever. I'm trying to what I'm really curious about is, you know, when did Section 132 originate? What does the historical record say in relationship to when it originated? And one of the big things that talks about its origination is this High Council meeting where there were so many people that said, yeah, in this High Council meeting in August of 1843, Hyrum read what is now Section 132. And so I guess my question is just, you know, what is the way that we deal with all of these people who said that it was Section 132?
Yeah. Well, we don't have anything that's presented to the public for examination until September 14th, 1852, 8 years after the death of Joseph and Hyrum, where they're not there to be able to defend themselves. I think one of the best methods is to read that section for ourselves very prayerfully. And when it has flagrant doctrinal contradictions with the rest of the scriptures, when it falsely attributes men to be polygamists who are obvious monogamists, and when it even teaches what I find to be Luciferian doctrines of when a man raises up to this level of the priesthood, they can commit all manner of sins and still inherit celestial glory. Mm-hmm. I think we can find out if that's from the Lord or not.
So for instance, you're thinking that some of the later things that came about, as far as like basically that as long as you don't like murder or commit the sin against the Holy Ghost, like that part of Doctrine and Covenants 32.
You're referring to section verse 26. If you share my screen, I just want to be clear what it is that I'm referring to, because I don't want to be putting words in anybody's mouth. Verily I say unto you, if a man marry a wife according to my word, if they are sealed by the Holy Spirit of promise according to mine appointment, he or she shall commit any sin or transgression of the new and everlasting covenant, whatever, and all manner of blasphemies. And if they commit no murder wherein they shed innocent blood, yet they shall come forth in the morning of the first resurrection and enter into their exaltation. So in other words, that specifically, when Doctrine and Covenants section 1, the Lord speaking there says, I cannot look upon sin with the least degree of allowance. Whoever the author is of section 132 now says you can commit any sin or transgression, whatever, all manner of, but let me finish this, all manner of blasphemies, and still receive your exaltation. I recognize a very different author from section 132 to section 1.
Okay. So the hypothesis here is that had to have been added later. That was not what was read.
Yeah,
in the High Council meeting.
Whatever was read in the High Council meeting, we just don't have anything to go off of. What we do have 8 years after Joseph and Hyrum's death, when they can no longer defend themselves, is this attributed to Joseph Smith. Sounds nothing like he's ever published in his entire life. It flagrantly goes against all of his teachings publicly, all of his private teachings, and it teaches flagrantly false doctrines. So we can judge this. Is this what comes from Joseph Smith? Do we have anything that sounds like it anywhere else from Joseph Smith?
So and I'm looking at this kind of forensically, because I'm thinking, okay, so the idea is that these words that you're reading right here in front of you were not read in that High Council meeting.
I don't know. I mean, do we have anything to go off of?
Well, that's what as I was looking into this, that was where I found the testimony of Austin Cowles. He was in the meeting. And
he was the one that one of the accusers from the Nauvoo Expositor, correct?
Yes, yeah.
How seriously do you take the accusers from the Nauvoo Expositor?
Well, I don't necessarily.
Why are you bringing them up here?
I'm just bringing them up because they said things that are.
You're referring to the accusers. You're referring to the accusers from the Nauvoo Expositor. Why do you take them seriously and bring them up here?
Well, I'm just comparing what they said to what Doctrine and Covenants 132 says.
Do you believe the accusers of the Nauvoo Expositor, or just this one?
Well, I'm just trying to evaluate the nature of what
Should members of
they
the
were.
church treat the accusers of the Nauvoo Expositor seriously?
Well, hold on here a second. Let's just evaluate what they said and then take a look at how it compares to section 132. Because what I found to be shocking, because all right, fine, we could say, no, section 132 was not what was read in that meeting. Yet Austin Cowles says things about like the sealing up of persons unto eternal life against all sin, save that of the shedding of innocent blood or consenting thereto. That sounds a lot like what was talked about in section 132. Section 132 talks about marrying virgins. Austin Cowles says that part of this revelation talked about marrying virgins. Section 132 talks about, David and Solomon having many wives, and that they didn't sin in that, but only in the matter of Uriah. He's bringing up things that are in section 132. And my question is where did he come up with this stuff that correlates so tightly? Jacob Verdine, who's
he's a fundamentalist polygamist.
Yeah. He pointed some of this out, which I thought was interesting. The way that it correlated to some of the things that were in the Doctrine and Covenants. And so, in here you can see the things that are in the Doctrine and Covenants 132, and you compare those to the thing that Austin Cowles said. And then the same thing happens with Jane Law.
This is also her publications from the Nauvoo Expositor. It sounds like so far you're relying upon things pointed out by fundamentalist polygamists and published in the Nauvoo Expositor. Is there anything do you consider the Nauvoo Expositor anti-Mormon?
Well, the thing is I whether it's anti-Mormon or not, I'm just wondering if it's true what they're saying, because they're saying that because Jane Law and William Law both said that Hyrum read to them the revelation. And the reason I think this is credible is because they detail specific things that are in section 132, such as, for instance, that it authorized some to have the number of 10 in the number of wives. And 10 is a number that is used specifically talking about the number of virgins in section 132. So what this seems to indicate to me anyway, is that within section 132, you have it seems that section 132 was written at least before May 4th, 1844, because these people extemporaneously in 1844 are talking about things that are clearly in section 132. So if you're going to say that section 132 was created after Joseph's death, this stuff just doesn't seem to fit that.
Yeah. From the Nauvoo Expositor. Now, how do you think Joseph and Hyrum, do you believe that they would have acknowledged this was from them, or would they have denied these accusations?
Oh, no, they did. So Hyrum and Joseph in the Nauvoo Neighbor in June 19th of 1844, this is after the Nauvoo Expositor came out. They came out, and the thing was is that they actually said that there was an authentic revelation received, and that they did talk about that
in other words, if somebody were to if they were to pause this video right now and to look it up for themselves, where do Joseph and Hyrum say that there was a revelation on polygamy?
If I believe correctly, it's in the Nauvoo Neighbor on June 19th, 1844. People can go and look there. What they did is they admitted that this revelation was about polygamy, and that they talked with the High Council about it, but that it was just about polygamy in former days or in the afterlife. And considering that they were trying to hide all of this, which we all agree polygamy was happening in secret. The question is was Joseph a part of the group that was doing this in secret? And I would expect if they were doing it in secret and they wanted to keep it secret, that this is the sort of thing that they would say.
Now, will you do me a favor? When the post-production editing happens, if there is an original source that people can look up and read for themselves, because I have certainly never read this from Joseph, I'd be very interested in it, and I would want to follow it to its logical, truthful conclusion. If you do find it,
absolutely, I will. I have the link to you can look up the Nauvoo Neighbor, June 19th, 1844, and I want to be very careful though about what I say they said. I'm sort of paraphrasing here, especially in the second part where they admit that what was that?
Did you read the document for yourself?
Yes, I did. I'm trying to remember the parts that I read specifically from it. but they never said that this was the things in the Nauvoo Expositor were just total fabrications out of nothing. They definitely didn't say that.
Well, most accusations in general, it'll have some, at the very least, some grains of truth that can be that can certainly be sensationalized. I just know that's the nature of accusations in general, especially when religious and political aspirations are involved.
Absolutely. And so, anyway, the thing is
there anything more credible than the accusers in the Nauvoo Expositor?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, as I was looking into this subject, another thing that I came across was William Marks, who was a RLDS. So William Marks he's not a Brighamite. He's not part of the Brighamite cabal.
1865. So how many years after Joseph's death is this?
This is May 1st of 1865.
Okay, so we're talking about 21 years after his death.
Yeah, yeah. And so at this time, William Marks, who has no interest in protecting Brigham Young, is in a meeting of the RLDS First Presidency. Okay, so they're there, and here's what it says according to this meeting, the notes from this meeting, which are part of the RLDS archives. It says, the question arose as to whether Joseph the martyr taught the doctrine of polygamy. President William Marks said Brother Hyrum came to his place, so he's talking about back in the past, that Hyrum came to him and told him he, Hyrum, did not believe in it, in polygamy, and he, Hyrum, was going to Joseph about it, and if he, Joseph, had a revelation on that subject, that he would believe it. And after that, Hyrum read a revelation on it, referring to polygamy, in the High Council. That's that August meeting we were talking about. And he, Marks, felt it was not true, but he saw the High Council received it. Mm-hmm. So my take on this is that William Marks is like, you know, hey, everybody, like, I know we don't want to think that Joseph and Hyrum practice polygamy, but this is, you know, this is what my experience was with Hyrum in relation to polygamy.
Yeah.
So that was one. Another one was, go ahead.
That might be the same. That might be the same indication when William Marks says, when he read what is now section 132, that he thought it was whatever was read seemed much shorter than what he was now reading. That's now section 132.
Yeah, and maybe years later, I don't know. And I know that there is some controversy over the length of the revelation, and there has definitely been some talk about that. Yeah. Anyway,
why don't we have Joseph Smith teaching this? In other words, there's lots of things that are, the more years that go by, the more that people are remembering more things after Joseph and Hyrum are no longer around to defend themselves. If we claim that Joseph Smith teaches it, can we show it from Joseph Smith?
No, I would say no, because he was keeping it a secret.
Well, it sounds like the Lord was very clear in the Doctrine and Covenants that this generation would have the word of the Lord through Joseph, not through people having recollections decades afterwards, but through Joseph. Fair
enough. One thing that was interesting was the story of Zeno Gurley. So he was an RLDS apostle, and the RLDS church was very much trying to establish that they were the ones who were the true followers of Joseph because they didn't practice polygamy. Well, he goes to find the truth, and he knew that in that meeting there was a guy named, well, we already talked about Austin Cowles, who had apostatized from the church. So he obviously wasn't part of the Brigham cabal. Yeah. But then
Cowles was one of the Nauvoo Expositor accusers.
Yes, Cowles was. But Leonard Sobey was another one. And so this guy, Zeno Gurley, goes to basically find this guy and say, hey, you know, like, what went on at that meeting, you know, what was read there. And Zeno ends up going and finding him. And what Sobey says, he says, I have read carefully said revelation, speaking of section 132, since published in the Book of Doctrine and Covenants of said church, and say to the best of my knowledge and belief, it is the same, word for word, as the revelation then read by Hyrum Smith.
Now, hold on one second. The section that is now known as section 132 in the Doctrine and Covenants, that did not become part of the canon of Scripture until 1876, when the previous revelation on marriage and monogamy was still inside of the Scriptures. What year is he claiming that this happened?
Up at the top, you can see it's 1886 is when he submits this
So
statement.
how many? Remind me with the math. How many years after Joseph Smith?
That's like 45 years. It's a long time after.
Do you find these claims more credible than the teachings of Joseph Smith himself?
No, because the question is
Sounds like you're making quite a case for it.
section 132 the teachings of Joseph Smith himself? There's no doubt that I believe that Joseph Smith was doing this in secret, 100%. Like, why would Leonard Sobey lie? He doesn't have anything to gain. Also, you know, Leonard Sobey resigned his apostleship in the RLDS church after hearing Sobey's testimony. He just realized we got it wrong. There's another RLDS member, Ebenezer Robinson, who knew Hyrum Smith, and he's recorded as saying that Hyrum basically told him all about polygamy and stuff when he was alive and was for it. And he said this, he says, I'm sorry that it is so, but we cannot undo the past. Why would people like Ebenezer Robinson, why would Leonard Sobey, why would, you know, William Marks, these people in the RLDS church who were there in that time, why would these three people, just to start, why would they, what is their motivation to go and say that, oh no, Joseph and them practice polygamy when it hurts their case to say that we are the real church of Joseph Smith because we reject polygamy?